300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on a Monday morning, a jam-packed Monday morning. Some big news in the NBA. Luke Walton and the Kings have parted ways. LeBron's second career ejection and a bizarre fourth quarter rally by the Pittsburgh Steelers capped off by a Chargers win. I'm going to touch on all of that. But first, I have to start with the marquee football game yesterday, the matinee matchup on Sunday between the Dallas Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs defensively prevailed to a 19-9 victory over the number 1 rated offense in the NFL and the Dallas Cowboys. And now the Chiefs all of a sudden have won 4 straight games. They're 7-4. Overall. And this was a big game for the Kansas City Chiefs because not only was this against an elite team in the NFC, and I'll touch on how this connects to the Dallas Cowboys in just a minute, but this was a marquee victory for a team that really hadn't established itself fully and hadn't really collected a marquee win all year. When we think about the Kansas City Chiefs, the wins that they've accrued over the season, they didn't really have a marquee win. They didn't have a win that they could say, okay, this is why we believe we can vault forward into the elite status, especially amongst the NFL best teams. But yesterday was a perfect example of why the Kansas City Chiefs are so relevant, why they're 100% back in the fold, is because now they're starting to reestablish their identity. Patrick Mahomes is starting to regain that confidence, and he's finally looking like his old self. We saw against the Raiders, that was the first time in nearly a month where we felt like this offense was starting to click. Patrick Mahomes was starting to do Patrick Mahomes-like stuff, flinging the football around. Obviously had over 400 yards and 5 touchdowns in that win. And the continuity between him and Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill and the offense was finally starting to flourish last week. And even yesterday, this is still a group that put up over 327 total yards of offense. Mahomes still had 260 passing yards. So this offense, though it didn't score as much as they did against the Raiders or as much as they have in previous games this year, they still put up 19 points. They still executed on a number of critical plays. And the reality is, you can see the confidence restored. And you can see this team returning to their old self in this win yesterday. The way that Patrick Mahomes is making throws, yes, he still missed a couple key targets, but the reality is this team is now once again returning to a level of play that had elevated them the past several years to that Super Bowl. To those Super Bowls, plural, as they reached 2 back-to-back years. They were playing a lot more intelligently. They executed in the fourth quarter. They had a much more strategic game plan in the fourth quarter with the lead. They were trusting the run. They were relying on the run game, which was something we didn't see. Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 63 rushing yards and a touchdown. And Mahomes really only threw it occasionally on third downs just to move the chains. But they were smart. They were intelligent in the fourth quarter. And the defense is starting to peak at the right time. They're really starting to round into form. A defense that we've maligned and just scrutinized the entire season because they've just been so horrific, that if you look at this defense, what they've been able to do over the last 4 weeks, holding the Giants to 17 points, holding the Packers, albeit without Aaron Rodgers, to 7 points, holding the Raiders to 14 points last week, and then holding the number one offense in the Dallas Cowboys to 9 points, keeping them out of the end zone the entire night despite 5 trips to the red zone. Their defense is looking a lot stronger, a lot better. Chris Jones had 3.5 sacks. The Chiefs had 5 sacks yesterday. Entering yesterday's game, they only had 14 sacks as a team. And they had an interception late in the game. Chris Jones tipped the pass of Dak Prescott's last pass that resulted in the game-sealing interception. They had a forced fumble. They applied constant pressure. Steve Spagnuolo did a great job of calling up a lot of pressure, calling a lot of blitzes. We saw him do that now for the second straight week. He did that against the Raiders right from the opening possession. He did it against the Cowboys right from the opening possession. So the defense is rounding into shape. They're trusting their run game. Mahomes is finding and regaining that swagger and that confidence that we've been so accustomed to seeing. And the Chiefs are in a great spot right now because you look up at the standings, and despite everything that's been going on around them, and despite their slow start, they're 7-4, and they're only 1 game back of Tennessee, who just lost yesterday for the best record in the AFC. Now, from the Dallas Cowboys perspective, I'm not going to glean too much. I'm not going to extract too much from this game because it's hard to evaluate this team when you don't have Amari Cooper, who is under COVID protocols, late scratch. CeeDee Lamb missed the entire second half after a potential concussion scare on one of the final plays of the first half. He banged his head in the back of the end zone. So no Randy Gregory. So the offense was severely hamstrung. There's no question about that. But it obviously didn't help that they were without those guys. It also didn't help that some of their key players, Cedric Wilson and others, dropped a lot of key passes. And Dak Prescott wasn't great yesterday. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But he didn't get as much help from his wide receivers as he probably would have had Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb been fully available for this game. CeeDee Lamb in this instance for the second half. But the defense for Dallas actually still looks great. Micah Parsons was wreaking havoc all over the field, 2 sacks. The guy has been an absolute menace up front for Dallas, and they still held the Chiefs to 19 points. They did a great job. So Dallas's defense is right where it should be, and the NFC East is still theirs to lose. So I'm not too concerned for the Dallas Cowboys after yesterday's game. I don't think that people are going to be making big proclamations about the Cowboys based off of that performance. It more has to do with what the Chiefs were doing and what they have been doing over the last month than what Dallas failed to do. And that's really the difference yesterday. Chiefs extending their win streak to 4. They played smart football. Defense excelled. Offense is beginning to flourish and rev up. And they're playing much more intelligently, trusting the run game, taking what the defense is giving to them. Big time, big time. First marquee win of the year for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I want to transition to this story and to this football game. The Indianapolis Colts and the Buffalo Bills squared off yesterday at Orchard Park in Buffalo, New York. And the Colts obviously were one of the slowest teams out of the gates. They had the most difficult opening 5 games of the season for any NFL team in the year. So we knew they'd come out slowly. They started off 1-4. They've now won 5 of their last 6 games. They're above 500 for the first time all year. Now, stop me if I've said this before. I'm a big believer in the Indianapolis Colts. If you've been listening to me for the last 2 years, you will know how bullish I've consistently been on the Indianapolis Colts. And it's all because of the arrival of one individual. One man changed my perception, changed my whole outlook on the Indianapolis Colts. And that's Jonathan Taylor. Now, obviously, I'm a huge Wisconsin homer. And so I have a huge vested interest in the Indianapolis Colts, and I root for them because of Jonathan Taylor. But I was objective and have said this repeatedly since the Indianapolis Colts drafted Jonathan Taylor 2 years ago. I said when they drafted him, this was fully an objective perspective based purely on the talent that I knew Jonathan Taylor had as a running back. The Indianapolis Colts are drafting the next elite running back in the NFL. For some context, I went to Wisconsin. And when I was a junior, Jonathan Taylor was a freshman, and that's when he burst onto the scene. In fact, his very first game of the year as a true freshman, we were playing against Utah State. He was a backup at the time to a guy named Bradrick Shaw. And as a backup, he had 94 rushing yards and a touchdown as a backup. And Paul Chris said in the second game of the year, okay, young buck, yeah, you're going to be the starting running back. His first game as a starting running back at the collegiate level for the University of Wisconsin. We're playing Florida Atlantic at home. He rushes for 223 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that's when I knew, this kid is special. This is going to be the next Ron Dayne at Wisconsin. And this is a guy who, in his freshman year at Wisconsin, 3 times rushed for over 200 rushing yards. 3 times he rushed for 200 or more yards in a game. His sophomore year, he rushed 4 times for 200-plus rushing yards in a game, along with one 300-plus rushing yard game in a triple overtime win against Purdue. His junior year, he rushed for over 200 yards 4 times. And even now, there's this new kid, Braylon Allen, who's a freshman at Wisconsin, that just rushed for 228 yards and 3 touchdowns against Nebraska. So Wisconsin's running backs are starting to consistently produce now, especially at a young freshman year age. And you look at his production all 3 years at Wisconsin. His first year at Wisconsin, 1,997 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. His second year, nearly 2,200 rushing yards with 16 touchdowns. His junior year, over 2,000 rushing yards again with 21 touchdowns, and he was a Heisman finalist. And honestly, I argued he should have garnered more consideration for the Heisman Trophy that year. But needless to say, you could see just how talented this kid was. He was a track star in high school. So he has the speed. He's got the training. He's got the footwork. He's got the size. And when you look at yesterday's win over the Buffalo Bills, it was 1,000% because of Jonathan Taylor. And he's the reason why this team is going to accomplish anything. If they can accomplish anything this year, it's going to be because of him. Because his running, along with the offensive line, they exerted their will on the Buffalo Bills. They said, we're not going to play any mind games, any trickery, no smoke and mirrors. We are going to run it down your throat, and can you stop us? And yesterday, the answer was no. They rushed Jonathan Taylor 32 times. It was a career high, 185 yards, 4 touchdowns. The Colts as a team ran the ball 46 times yesterday against the Buffalo Bills. They only passed it 20 times. 46 rushes to just 20 passes yesterday. So the writing was on the wall. We are going to run this up the gut until you can stop us. And the entire afternoon or the entire morning, whenever it was that they played, Buffalo Bills could not stop the run. The Colts ate up nearly 38 minutes of time of possession. Bills just had 22. And again, they were riding the backs of really riding the back of Jonathan Taylor, but also that offensive line. And that was the big difference because they just simply bullied them. Their leading receiver was their tight end, Jack Doyle, who had 3 catches for 30 yards, just to put something into perspective. And so I've said this before, and I'll say this again. The Colts have the recipe and the personnel to be a Super Bowl caliber team. But it all comes down to one thing. And it's not Jonathan Taylor. We know what we're going to get from Jonathan Taylor. We know how consistent of a stallion he is. We know what we're going to get from T.Y. Hilton and Michael Pittman Jr. We know what we're going to get from the offensive line, how they're going to manhandle a defensive line. The defense is elite. We know what we're going to get from those other parts of the team. The biggest question is, how will Carson Wentz play? Now, to be honest, I thought that the Colts were better than the Bills last year in the divisional round when they lost 27-24 last year. And that was with Phillip Rivers, who I thought wasn't talented enough. Now, to be honest, I'm not fully convinced either that Carson Wentz is talented enough, but he made some big time throws yesterday. He executed when he needed to, and he wasn't a hindrance to the team. And that was the most important point. So as long as he can continue to deliver timely throws, combined with the productivity of Jonathan Taylor on the ground, well, the sky's the limit for this team. They have everything else you would want. They have the culture. They've got the head coach, elite defense, elite offensive line play, consistent, productive running game. Perhaps they could have a slightly more A-lister type of wide receiver, but not every team is perfect. This is about as perfect of a construction of a team as you can get. So they still have a brutal schedule left. That's the only problem, is the Colts have had like the most difficult schedule of the season. They still have the Bucs and the Patriots at home. They travel to the Arizona Cardinals. So there's still a gauntlet with about 5 or so games left in the season. And so I'm not positive they'll make the playoffs. I hope that they can. I'll put it this way. If they are able to get into the playoffs, they are going to be a nightmare of a matchup, because to me, they're very similar to the Tennessee Titans, except the difference is they've got more elite offensive line play and their defense is better than the Titans. At least the personnel are overall better. So I was impressed with the Indianapolis Colts yesterday to tack on 41 points to the number 1 defense in the NFL, and the NFL team that's allowed the fewest points all season. It's incredible. And Jonathan Taylor, I understand, I tweeted this out yesterday. I know that their record doesn't support it, but Jonathan Taylor deserves to be included in the NFL MVP conversation. I'm not saying he's going to win it. I'm not saying he deserves to be the front runner, but the impact that he has to winning for his team, it's Derrick Henry-esque. I mean, those two guys, those are the 2 running backs that should be included in the conversation. Now, obviously, Henry is out of it because of his injury, but what they mean to their organizations, the fact that they are the sole reason and the sole reasons behind their team's success and winning records, should be rewarded. It should be rewarded, and he certainly deserves to be in that NFL MVP conversation. And now he leads the NFL for the most rushing yards, Jonathan Taylor. So just proud of him as a former Badger to do that and having a tremendous, tremendous season. I would love to see the Colts find a way to make the postseason. Speaking of finding a way to make the postseason, 2 teams that are vying for postseason berths in a really crowded AFC, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the LA Chargers battled yesterday at SoFi Stadium. This is a game that turned from bizarrely boring and bland to intriguing, stunning, and entertaining, because that fourth quarter was one of the wildest fourth quarters in an NFL game that I've seen in quite some time. There are certainly some games. We saw the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens last year in the month of November. That fourth quarter was wild when Lamar Jackson had to leave for like a couple plays, and he came back on a 4th and 15 and led the Ravens to a comeback win. So it's not matching that game. It's certainly not matching the Chiefs and the Rams from a couple years ago at the Coliseum for a Monday night game. But the fourth quarter in particular was absolutely epic from both of these teams. And for the Chargers in particular, they led 27-10 deep into the third quarter, late into the third quarter. And how the Pittsburgh Steelers managed to put on this furious rally to score 27 points in the fourth quarter, to come all the way back and actually take the lead at one point in the fourth quarter, 37-34, was mind-boggling. And probably what was more mind-boggling was how they did it. First, you had the blocked punt that set up the Steelers offense inside the 5. Then you had the tip pass, the batted pass by Cameron Hayward that must have legitimately sat up in the air for 5 full seconds before Cam Sutton tracked it down and intercepted it in the red zone. That set up the Steelers offense once again. And then again, at some point, Boswell puts the Steelers up by 3, and you're thinking to yourself, how in the world did this game just happen? Are we watching the 2021 Chargers, or are we watching the historically bad Chargers teams that came up with gaffes and new ways to lose, invented new ways to lose every single year? And that's why, to me, yesterday was a franchise-altering win for the LA Chargers. Did this game catapult them into the playoffs? No. Although at the moment they are in the playoff picture because of the win. But this was one of those instances where it's one of those types of games where historically the Chargers lose this type of game. This is a game that they find a way to lose. They've always been the butt end of the joke, and they've invented new gaffes. Always the Chargers just blew games. In fact, if you look at them historically since 2011, and this was an interesting stat that was brought up during the broadcast, since 2011, the Chargers have blown 32 games in which they've led by double digits in the fourth quarter, which was the most in the NFL. And coming into this season, coming into this game rather, they only had one instance where they led by double digits in the fourth quarter, and they blew that game, which was a massive improvement given, again, in the past, what they had choked away. And all of these stats were resurfacing, or appeared to be resurfacing, given how close it looked like the Steelers were on the verge of pulling this game off. The Steelers, in their own right, were 0-230 when they've trailed by 17 or more points in the second half. And this was about to be the first time they were going to collect a win. So this would have been a game that the Chargers would have lost. In fact, last year, this is a game that they lose. They were 7-9 last year. And of their 9 losses, 7 were decided by 1 possession. 3 were decided by 3 points or fewer. And 4 of them, they either had a lead during or entering the fourth quarter, and they blew those games. But that didn't happen yesterday. They rallied. Herbert executed a great game-winning drive. They hit Mike Evans for the game-winning 53-yard touchdown bomb, and that was a wrap. And this was a really impressive win, not only given how crowded the AFC is, and how very much alive and open the conference is for the taking. So trying to keep pace with all the other teams is critical, especially for the Chargers, battling in the AFC West. Now the Chiefs are in front of them in their own division. And to just stave off that furious rally, and it was a furious furious rally by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, 27 points in the fourth quarter for an offense that had been pretty anemic the majority of the year. Big Ben still looks extremely slow. He is really slow. And for a game of that magnitude to end this time in the Chargers' favor speaks to the improvements and the growth and the development. Justin Herbert continues to impress, especially athletically. I mean, obviously, his passing speaks for itself. He had 382 passing yards, like 3 touchdowns. His arm talent is tremendous, but it's his athleticism with his legs that he continues to display. He was collecting huge first downs with his legs. He was gashing the defense of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 90 rushing yards. He led the Chargers in rushing yards yesterday. Just gashing them for huge runs at a time. And that was really the difference, was his ability to get outside the pocket and to make things happen with his legs. Obviously, Austin Eckler, 4 touchdowns yesterday. That was big. 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns. And that's certainly not something to sneeze at. You collect 4 touchdowns in an NFL game. That's high praise. That deserves high praise. And again, I think Brandon Staley is doing a really great job with this team. They're 6-4, and they've got a really good roster. I mean, this is a loaded team that is finally starting to fully play up to their potential. So we'll see. Right now, they are in the playoff picture. If the playoffs were to start today, I believe they'd be the 6th seed, maybe the 7th seed. But it was an impressive win yesterday. It was an impressive win last night for the LA Chargers. So I want to transition to the NBA for a second. So the Lakers and the Detroit Pistons, rather, battled at the Palace yesterday, and LeBron received his second ejection. He earned a second ejection of his 19-year career, was involved in a little skirmish and a little scuffle with the Pistons as Isaiah Stewart came in the middle of the third quarter after a free throw by Jeremy Grant. LeBron, Stewart are jostling for rebounding position, trying to box one another out. And it got a little too physical, and LeBron extended his elbow and cut kind of just below the eye of Isaiah Stewart. And blood was streaming down the side of his face. He was obviously bleeding underneath his eye. There was a stoppage. And whether or not you think, first of all, it was accidental or inadvertent, it honestly looked in the moment inadvertent and didn't seem premeditated to me. But regardless, LeBron tried to check in on him afterwards. He approached him afterwards, and that's where tempers flared. That's where Isaiah Stewart just lost his mind and began bull rushing and charging after LeBron. And he had to be restrained and subdued by his own teammates, by NBA officials, security officials. And once it seemed like he was calming down, he charged at them again 3 times. He kind of attacked the team. And first of all, LeBron in that instance, yes, he deserved to be ejected from the game in that instance. It was excessive contact above the shoulder. So no qualms about that. But there wasn't any malicious intent behind it, didn't seem to me. And so I understand why Isaiah Stewart was frustrated that he got elbowed in the face. You get elbowed in the face. I understand why you're going to be upset. But the way that it triggered him and his reaction just seemed really gratuitous to me. He was reckless. It was, quite frankly, idiotic. And I'm just thinking how I would react if I would just start bull rushing someone who I didn't think intentionally elbowed me in the face. I'd be pissed off, sure, but his reaction is going to warrant a pretty punitive response from the NBA. I don't know, beyond a fine. They're probably going to suspend him a couple of games. And to be honest, they should, because That's not a natural way that you respond to an elbow to the face. He had an opportunity to square up with LeBron when they were face to face a couple minutes prior. If he wanted to trade blows, that would have been the time to do it, as opposed to once everyone is grouped together and they're separated. Personally, I just don't think that that would have been the time to do it. It was just a weird reaction to that altercation. And something really set him off. It was almost like a delayed response. Like in the moment, he was almost shell-shocked, I think, when LeBron approached him after it happened, that he didn't have time to put together all of his feelings and his emotions and come to grips with what just happened and who just did it, who just delivered the blow. I think by the time he realized who did it, what happened, that's when the anger began to swell. And that's when he had the reaction that he had. But it was just kind of bizarre how quickly it escalated from his perspective and how adamant he was on trying to approach LeBron and trying to approach the Lakers and aggressively pursue them. In fact, they said that Corey Joseph actually, after it looked like Isaiah Stewart exited the premises into the locker room, Corey Joseph actually went over to the Lakers side in anticipation of Stewart trying to enter into the arena once again, or enter onto the court again from the Lakers' own bench side. So the whole ejection, I understand why LeBron was ejected, and obviously Isaiah Stewart, they were both ejected. His reaction to me, though, just seemed really careless and really unnecessary. So, not to mention, it was very uncharacteristic of LeBron to engage in a tussle like this. When we think about LeBron, he's been in the NBA for 19 years. This is actually his first ejection because of legitimate unnecessary physical contact with an opponent. He was ejected only one other time in 2017 when he was part of the Cleveland Cavaliers and they were hosting the Miami Heat, and he was arguing a non-call from the ref. And he aggressively kind of stomped over to the referee to give him a piece of his mind. And he was automatically assessed 2 technicals and ejected from the game. And that was for a verbal altercation, not even for an actual physical altercation. So yesterday was the first time in his career that he was ejected because of a physical altercation that on the surface didn't appear to have malicious intent behind it. But again, very uncharacteristic for him to be involved in an event that blows up like that. I understand it's LeBron. So from Isaiah Stewart's perspective, hey, opportunity to get into a little skirmish with LeBron. That's kind of cool. He was bleeding down the side of his face, though, so I don't know how much that was really factoring into it. But the other thing about it was the Lakers were down by 12 at that point, midway through the third quarter. And the only saving grace that I can think of is the fact that they managed to actually win this game against this. Again, this is a Detroit team that obviously isn't very good. They're 4-12 on the season right now. They've got the second worst record in the Eastern Conference, the 4th worst record overall in the NBA. So I'm sure there was a lot of frustration on the Lakers side of things. How are we losing to this Detroit Pistons team? More importantly, how are we losing to this Detroit Pistons team by double digits on the road? But again, they managed to rally around one another. And Russell Westbrook was sensational down the stretch, 26 points, 9 rebounds, 10 assists. He was making sound decisions. Anthony Davis had a monster performance. He found himself 30 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, 5 blocks, 4 steals. In fact, that one sequence at the end of the game in which he blocks Cade Cunningham, the number 1 overall pick's 3-pointer. Cunningham gets it back, tries to drive it on him to the rim. He blocks him again, stuffed him twice on the same possession. And then he ran the floor to the other end of the basket, and Russell Westbrook found him for a dunk. The effort that he showed on that sequence was tremendous. And he was great the entire night. And perhaps this can kind of light a fire, maybe light a more robust fire under this Lakers squad that can springboard them forward into a little bit of a run. We'll see. But of course, of course this happened at the Detroit Pistons. There's something about Little Caesars Arena at the Palace that just kind of invites and incites violence. Obviously, we remember the Malice at the Palace back in 2004. In fact, coincidentally, this time around nearly occurred 17 years to the day. It was November 19th, 2004, that the Malice at the Palace between the Indiana Pacers and Ron Artest against the Detroit Pistons and the fans in particular at the arena where that brawl ensued. Nearly 17 years to the day that took place. And just coincidentally, I mean, 2 days difference besides the 17 years. There's just something about playing at Detroit that just invites this violence at times. Can't really explain it, but that's kind of what happens. But again, hopefully the players can kind of rally around one another. They seem to echo that same sentiment that maybe this was an opportunity for them to come together and grow as a team, face a little adversity as a team, and it can launch them forward and catapult them onto this run. Hopefully that happens. I would certainly love to see that. Finally, final topic before my Maliks Moments, another NBA topic. So the Sacramento Kings have officially fired Luke Walton, who was in the middle of his third year as the head coach of the Sacramento Kings. They were 6-11. They just lost 7 of their 8 games in the NBA, some of which had come to teams that were seated a little bit below them right now in the Western Conference. And this isn't a very good Sacramento Kings team this year. And Luke Walton, of course, this was his third year. He had back-to-back 31-win seasons for the Kings. This one got off to a slow start. So management just decided, you know what, we're going to part ways. But to me, this is the type of firing that illustrates the mindset of the NBA, and it mirrors the mindsets of a lot of NCAA programs as well. And this is actually a major crisis, I think, that is beleaguering both the NBA and the NCAA when it comes to NBA franchises and NCAA programs. And those are inflated expectations. Right now, what we are seeing across NBA franchises and across NCAA programs are inflated expectations and inflated views of programs and franchises' rosters, their entire team personnel, and the expectations that they have for those teams and what they believe those teams can accomplish. We just saw Florida fire Dan Mullins yesterday or 2 days ago after he led Florida to the SEC championship game last year. Now, is Luke Walton, as we shift it back to the NBA, is Luke Walton an elite NBA coach? No, he's not an elite NBA coach. We all know that he built his entire head coaching equity and legacy off of that half a season in the 2015-2016 year with the Warriors, where he led them to a 39 or coached them to a 39-4 start to that campaign before Steve Kerr came back and led them ultimately to that 73-9 season. So that was the entire credibility that Luke Walton had. Obviously, that was a job that landed him the Lakers gig, in which he ultimately went 98-148 during his tenure. In fact, as an overall head coach, and he's been a head coach for now 5 1/4 seasons, he's had a losing record as a head coach every single year. Overall, 166-241 as a head coach. So obviously that record isn't good. Now, in fairness to the Lakers, he's a former Laker. They thought perhaps he is a younger guy. Perhaps he could mesh well with the younger core that they had at the time of Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma. Didn't pan out at the time when the Lakers fired him. They thought it was a little bit people thought maybe it was a little bit premature, and the Kings jumped right on top of it. And they saw a precocious young coach and said, hey, listen, we think that he can still cultivate a culture and develop these younger players with the Kings, De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, that little group of theirs, and maybe they can go on a run. Obviously, that didn't work. And as a coach of the Kings, he was 68 and 93. But again, he's still a very young head coach. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if another NBA team scoops him up, or at the very least, he becomes an assistant coach or on the bench of another team. But this is the problem, and the Sacramento Kings epitomize this issue. Is the Sacramento Kings epitomize mediocrity in the NBA. They're kind of in this state of purgatory that I would say is almost worse than the Portland Trailblazers, who at least make the postseason every year. The Sacramento Kings, quite frankly, don't have a very good roster. So am I going to put the entire onus on Luke Walton for his inability to inspire the Sacramento Kings? No. Granted, whether or not you think he's a good coach or not, if you look objectively at this roster for the Sacramento Kings, no one in their right mind is going to say, oh, yeah, this is a definitive playoff team necessarily. I think that they have a lot of B and C caliber players. They have one all-star, or at least borderline all-star, in De'Aaron Fox, who I really like. I like Buddy Hield. I do. I love Davion Mitchell. He's a rookie. I like Harrison Barnes. He's a good player. Tyrese Halliburton is a second-year player that is playing nicely. But outside of that, you're looking at this roster, and it's got Louis King and Chimezie Metu and Rashawn Holmes and Terrence Davis. And Marvin Bagley just hasn't panned out for the Kings right now. Sure, he's got the talent, maybe, but we haven't seen it executed. This is the team that we're dealing with here. So what do you expect Luke Walton to do with the Sacramento Kings? And again, Mo Harkless is on the team. This roster is not a playoff roster. This isn't a playoff team. And the fact that the Kings, again, whether or not you think Luke Walton is the perfect coach, who cares? At this point, it's a moot point. The fact is, was the firing deserving? I don't know, maybe, but I don't think the roster would have complimented either coach that they can bring in. And I'll touch on Alvin Gentry, who he was placed the interim head coach, great coach. I don't think, and he'll probably earn the permanent gig, given he's a great head coach. And I thought that it was a mistake for the Pelicans to fire him. I thought he was starting to do a nice job turning around that franchise. But you look at the Kings, they're the 12th seed in the Western Conference right now. And the only team that is ranked above them, that is seated above them, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's the only team where you look at their roster and you compare them and you say, okay, yeah, the Kings have more talent than the Oklahoma City Thunder. I would agree with that. But the 10 other teams that are ahead of both OKC and the Sacramento Kings, the Kings don't have a better roster than them. And to be honest, the New Orleans Pelicans actually are seated below the Sacramento Kings. And when Zion is healthy and he returns, I think they'll have a better roster than the Sacramento Kings. So even the Spurs are right now below the Sacramento Kings. You could argue the Spurs have more talent than the Sacramento Kings. Maybe not. It's a toss-up. Regardless, and it all comes back to the inflated expectations that executives, that owners have for their teams. Now, granted, part of the reason why they've had so much success probably in business and in other outside ventures is because of those inflated expectations that their businesses will work and their ventures will work. But this is different. Again, you can't buy championship teams. Do you have the talent? And right now, the Kings just simply don't have the talent. And I feel badly for Alvin Gentry. I'm happy for him that he'll probably land this head coaching job. He's deserving to be a head coach in the NBA. But this is just going to be another stop. And I'm sure that in 2 or 3 years, they're going to probably let him go because he's going to have a similar record. And I don't view this Kings roster like I did the Warriors back in the Mark Jackson days, where he was consistently kind of leading the Warriors to a 6th and a 7th seed. And then you make one change, you make one hiring change, you bring in Steve Kerr, and all of a sudden he's able to unlock this new confidence and new potential in Steph that just elevates this team to exceedingly high levels. I don't see the same type of scenario happening with the Sacramento Kings and De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield and Harrison Barnes, and that being the core. Again, I love De'Aaron Fox, tons of respect for him. I love Davion Mitchell. I think he's going to be a tremendous player out of Baylor. He's a rookie, though. He needs time to develop. So I just think that it's a big problem right now, and it's a pervasive issue that we're seeing across both the NBA and the NCAA level. I mean, the Sacramento Kings have had the longest active playoff drought in the NBA. They haven't made the playoffs since 2006 when Rick Adelman was the coach. In fact, they've had 10 in those 15 years. The Kings have had 10 different head coaches in that time span. Alvin Gentry is going to be the 11th. Again, Rick Adelman was the last time. R.I.P. God bless his soul. Was the last Kings head coach to lead them to the playoffs. So the bottom line is Alvin Gentry's not going to lead this team all by his lonesome. They just need more talent. And the simple fact is the Sacramento Kings just don't have enough talent. And it comes down to that. It's as simple as that. They just don't. That's the bottom line. All right, final topic. Realized I had the LeBron James ticker on there. So apologies for that. Meant to have this ticker down there. Sacramento Kings, whatever. It happens. What are you going to do? Final topic of the day, my Maliks Moments. So I have a couple great Maliks Moments for you. So first, have to start with my Wisconsin Badger, Jonathan, my former Wisconsin Badger, Jonathan Taylor, erupted for 5 touchdowns in the 41-15 win over the Buffalo Bills for the Indianapolis Colts yesterday. Rushed for a career high 32 carries, 185 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown. Leads the NFL, first of all, in total rushing yards. He's now eclipsed Derrick Henry, surpassed him. Taylor is the 3rd youngest player to have 5 touchdowns in a game and the 3rd player to get all 5 in just 3 quarters. He's the first player to score 5 touchdowns in a regular season game against a team that was the number 1 defense in points allowed entering that week. And again, the job that he's done, his ability to just flourish, it's been amazing watching this guy play. And he's having a sensational breakout second year. This is just his second year in the NFL, and he's already crushing it. And he's currently leading the Indianapolis Colts on this playoff push. He's been their best player all season long. In fact, they're undefeated when he rushes for over 100 yards. He was absolutely sensational. He's got over 1,200 yards from scrimmage. Through his first 8 games, he's just the 8th player in NFL history to record 1,200 yards from scrimmage. Through 8 weeks in the NFL, he's been absolutely sensational. Speaking of sensational, the Alabama quarterback Bryce Young out of Mater Dei, which is close to me, he went off against the Arkansas Razorbacks on Saturday as the number 2 ranked team in the nation. Alabama knocked off the 21st ranked Arkansas Razorbacks 42-35. And he threw for 561 yards, 5 touchdowns, was 31 of 40. He broke the University of Alabama's single game passing record against Arkansas. That's a school record. The previous record was set all the way back in 1969 by Scott Hunter, of all people. So it's been nearly 50 years almost. And actually more than 50 years, if I do my math correctly, I guess 52 years. And he's the 3rd player in Alabama history to throw for at least 35 passing touchdowns in a season. Tua Tagovailoa and Mac Jones are the only 2 others to accomplish that feat. Along the way, the Crimson Tide clinched a berth to the SEC championship game to face number 1 ranked Georgia, which is going to be a great game. They clinched the SEC West with that performance on Saturday. And listen, he's got some spectacular offensive players, and a couple of his wide receivers helped him out. John Mechie III had a big game, 10 catches, 173 yards, 1 touchdown. Jamison Williams had 8 catches, 190 yards, and 3 touchdowns for the Crimson Tide. So the offense was exploding, and Bryce Young was having a tremendous game. He's been having a sensational sophomore year, his first year as the starting quarterback for Alabama. And what a performance, what an individual performance he had on Saturday. Speaking of individual performances, the Wisconsin running back, who I touched on briefly and referenced, Braylon Allen, had 228 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns in the 35-28 win over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Listen, this is another promising freshman running back from the University of Wisconsin that is starting to blossom. He's really starting to blossom, and I'm really excited about what Braylon Allen is doing for this program. Jonathan Taylor gave him a shout out yesterday, and it's great to see more Badgers having great success. Happy for him. The Louisville quarterback, Malik Cunningham, became the first player in ACC history to have 300-plus passing yards and 200-plus rushing yards in a game as Louisville knocked off Duke. They destroyed them 62-22. That is impressive. 300 passing yards, plus passing yards, 200-plus rushing yards in a game. And it's only fitting that it would come out of Louisville, given the fact that Lamar Jackson went to Louisville also, and I'm sure set close and similar records to that. So big performance from him. And then finally, big shout out to CJ Stroud making his Heisman case for the Ohio State Buckeyes. The 4th-ranked Buckeyes absolutely steamrolled and annihilated Michigan State, ranked number 7 at the time, 56-7. They led 49-0 at the half. And CJ Stroud was 32 of 35 for 432 yards, 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He had 3 incompletions in the entire game. And when you're throwing that volume of passes and you're still connecting on all of them, he had 3 receivers that had over 100 yards receiving. It was absolutely a sensational performance, made his Heisman case. I would argue that right now he's probably the slight Heisman favorite over Bryce Young. I think it's obviously a two-man race at the moment, but a huge performance, a major statement win from Ohio State. And CJ Stroud, I actually called a couple of his high school games. He went to Rancho Cucamonga High School, and I saw him play in high school, and he was sensational in high school. So it's not a surprise to me that he's having the amount of success that he's having right now at Ohio State. Major shout out to him. That'll do it for us on the show. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter at morning_Joe or just at Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Instagram, jmalk97, TikTok, Jonah Malkin. And as always, like, review, subscribe. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.